Good afternoon to our panelists and delegates who have joined us for the 7th Solar Power Africa 2021 webinar series in conjunction with the South African Energy Storage Association. I'm Neil Piper, the Head of Content for Messi Frankfurt, South Africa, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. The webinar will be addressing vehicle-to-grid technology and just a few house rules. Please, will you post questions in the chat function, the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll review the questions at the end of the webinar in our Q&A session. If we can't get through all the questions, we'll answer the questions post the webinar on the Solar Power Africa website. A recording of the webinar will also be made available post the webinar today. It's now my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome the panelists for today. Eaton Palmer, the Director of EELU E-Mobility Program. He's also a SAESA board member. Sidhu Kane, Managing Director, Africa for Eaton Electrical Sector.
Eaton, I believe that load shedding just kicked in, stage 4.
Stage 4. True. Okay, great. We'll kick it off from there. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining on this Friday afternoon in joining this specific webinar, a very topical point in the technology space and the role of energy storage in what that presents. As introduced, I'm Eaton Palmer, Director of the EELU Electric Mobility Program, but also a board member of the South African Energy Storage Association. It's my pleasure to address you all today and welcome you to this session today. We've got two great panelists, esteemed panelists in their field of expertise, joining us today. And I think they'll be sharing great insights on storage, the power sector, and vehicle to grid, and vehicle to everything in what that presents. So without further ado, today's session is hosted by the South African Energy Storage Association, SAESA. The objective of the association is really to promote energy storage in South Africa and Africa as a whole. The association itself aims to assist its members and their business development in South Africa and Africa at large. Currently, through SAESA, there's an active member base, active lobbying within the various activities of energy storage and the role that energy storage has to play. The current subcommittee activities include policy and regulation, technology and applications, and safety and standards. I think in the relative power sector in South Africa and the crisis in the technology landscape that we face in South Africa specifically, there's a massive opportunity that energy storage has got to play. Interesting enough, the IHS market analysis from 2020 on battery storage, South Africa ranked the top 10 globally as the energy storage market from their report. As much as our energy crisis drove that market development, we also see that opportunity on technology advancements globally, investments that have gone into the technologies across the board on all forms of technologies on energy storage, and how these technologies are really assisting our power sector. This is what's driving the new business models. It's providing solutions and also providing great technologies to support the energy transition, as much as it is bridging the gap for renewables to be integrated onto the grid. It's also providing energy access from developing countries in that. So without further ado, I will get underway with a slide deck as introductory from my side, and then just to lead the conversation forward. Okay, just Neil, can you just check on the slide share? Let's get that going. Apologies. Let's just get that. Okay, I think that should be sorted now. Great. I think that should be visible for everybody now. I think the key aspect on energy storage is looking at what is the future grid network. And if you look at the energy landscape, energy storage has a key role to play. When we look at bulk generation, there is the role of that to play on energy storage from that perspective. And how does energy storage match into to bridge the gaps on the various technologies that are coming in from the bulk generation perspective? When we look at the transmission side, we see the role of energy storage also playing a role there. And from the end user side as well, we see the role of energy storage being played there across the use from industrial, residential, and commercial. There's also the role that's highlighted within today's topic of transportation, where we see the opportunities of electric vehicles and how do these participate within the grid network as well. I think what's key to highlight within that is the ability of the battery systems and energy storage devices to be bidirectional. This is the ability what the technology presents. And I think in today's specific topic, the key thing is monetizing the electric vehicle battery that's there and the ability how electric vehicles support the grid network as well. So when we start to expand the opportunities on battery energy storage, you can see the magnitude on which the ability of technologies that energy storage provides to the grid network as well. This is in a range of services that are available. And when you look at this, this is both in the stationary storage application that we see within applications on the technologies that are available, but also directly to the grid services that are available, but then also in the off-grid and also transportation within that. And these are the opportunities that are available from energy storage as well. And for the purpose of today, when we speak about V2X, V2X in the energy space is vehicle to everything. And that really exists on vehicle to load, which is the ability to use the electric vehicle battery to provide power during power outages, as we see right now in South Africa, where we have rolling blackouts of our load shedding. Then you've got vehicle to home, which is the ability of the vehicle to support the home environment, typically from behind the meter services, and then also vehicle to building in terms of that context, and then vehicle to grid in terms of energy services to the grid network as well. So in terms of setting the scene, that is really what, we see the role of energy storage and the role of technologies within battery technology and also vehicle to grid in what that presents. So without further ado, I think before we introduce Bjorn as our first speaker, it's also good to know that the landscape of these vehicle to grid and vehicle to X technologies, as much as it might be known to still being it's in infancy in some markets, this slide really shows the global projects that are active, predominantly within Europe, but also quite active across the world, including Africa in terms of that. And we'll hear further insights from Bjorn specifically. So I think what's key to note is that this technology is growing. It's been active for many years, and it is already being deployed in various regions within that. So without further ado, thank you for your attention from my side. I will get kicked off now with introducing Bjorn, and then he will take us through on the insights from the international perspective. So just to introduce Bjorn, Bjorn joins us bright and early from the USA, from California specifically. Bjorn Christian is the managing director of Next Dimension. I've known Bjorn for quite a few years now, and it's a pleasure for him to be joining us today and sharing his expertise and insights that he has gained over the years. So without further ado, Bjorn, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eaton. Let me just see if I can share my screen here. So can you see my screen?
Yes, thanks, Bjorn.
And hear me? Thank you, Eaton. I really appreciate this opportunity to make a presentation to you, and thank you, SAESA, for allowing me to do that. The presentation today is an international perspective on V2G, and I'm trying to give a big picture. A little bit to my background. I have been involved in V2G since 2010, It's almost 11 years, and been involved in 11 projects all over the world, starting in Denmark, Hong Kong, Japan, United States, Europe, and also in Africa, which I'll get into. So this is based on a lot of personal experiences, what works and what doesn't work. I have some battle scars that I'm proud of. So I'm going to take you through with a broad brush, and then we can dig into more questions in the question and answer session. When I talk about V2G, I mean everything that's bidirectional power flow from a car. Here is a background on this slide. It's probably known to many of you. It's from Ed Hawkins. It's the temperature of the world from 1850 to 2017. And we can see that there's been a substantial warming over on the right in the red of the globe. This has led to an energy emergency or climate emergency. And lately, we also have energy crisis, certainly in South Africa and in other places, and also an air pollution crisis. Here are some pictures from California in 2018, where we had a very dry summer, long, hot summer, and that led to devastating wildfires in the autumn, with a loss of a lot of lives and tremendous amount of property damage. It also led to air pollution and dangerous air quality in large part of California, so you could not leave your house, certainly not without a mask. And here on the last picture is shown the pollution from a very large coal plant in South Africa. So all this is caused by all the CO2 that we're spewing out in the air. And we have to look at the largest emitter. And about those are certainly transportation is a very large CO2 emitter. If we start on the left on this slide and look at the world, the emission from the power sector is about 40%, and the transport is about 23%. If you take a look at California in 2019, it's vice versa. Transportation is almost 40%, and our electricity only contributes with 14.1%. And in South Africa, the latest I have is from 2016. And again, electricity and heat, 57%, whereas transport sector is only 11%. And we can, of course, also look at Sweden, just as an example, where transportation is 35%. Large part of this is transportation. So what we have to do is we have to reduce the CO2 emission from electricity generation, and of course also for the transport sector, because if we don't have clean energy and clean fuel, it doesn't really matter that we have electrical vehicles. So we have to do both. And this presentation, I will focus on the electrical vehicle side. It's also important to remember that it's not enough that we do it in California and Europe. We also have to do it in the emerging countries. We cannot leave anybody behind. Here's a chart that shows the African population is growing, by far the fastest growing population, estimated to grow to about 4.3 billion people by year 2100. Even though Africa's CO2 emission today is relatively low, a couple of % of the world, it will grow. And each of these people would like e-mobility, just like we have it in the industrial world. The good news is that V2G can help. We can ensure energy resilience, reduce CO2 emission and air pollution, and very important, we can make e-mobility more affordable by using the battery, which has already been paid for by the car owner for other purposes that I will show. The idea about V2G is quite simple. It's basically batteries can be used for many applications, and we know that batteries can be used for toys, it can be used for a ring, it can be used for your cell phones and so forth, and remote control. And the same is the case for an EV battery. It's just bigger, much bigger. Typically 60 kilowatt hour or up to 100 kilowatt hour if you're talking about passenger cars. And if you're talking about heavy equipment like heavy buses and transport buses, school buses, you're talking about 150 or maybe 250 kilowatt hour, depending on application. We buy the EV for use for driving, but we could also use it for vehicle to home. We could use it for community emergency power. We can use it for frequency regulation, as we have been doing in Denmark for about 5 years. We can use the battery for peak and off-peak arbitration. We can also use it, well, it's disappearing a little bit here, but last Christmas, Rivian with their R1T truck lit Christmas trees. We can use it for demand response. We can use it for vehicle to vehicle. We can use it for vehicle to load to our power tools or even our refrigerators. And we also have shown this summer that the new Ford F-150 Lightning could power a house. We can use it for demand charge, which is a big thing in California, where about 30 to 70% of the electricity bill for small corporations typically is from demand charge, not from the energy. So there's a big incentive to cut down on the demand charges. And in ESCOM, as Eaton mentioned, load shedding mitigation. We have rolling blackouts, and it would be nice, instead of buying a dedicated battery for your house, why not use your car, since it's already capable of doing much more than a 13 kilowatt hour battery from Tesla. And we can use it for CO2 reductions, which I will show also. There's a substantial potential for using the V2G energy storage to reduce CO2 emission. So let's just take an example and show that we can really move the needle with V2G. Here's an example for California. Projected in 2013, we want to have 5 million zero emission vehicles on the road in 2030. If all these were bidirectional, which of course they're not going to be, but if they were, we could assume that an EV cost about $25,000. It's up to Mr. Musk and Volkswagen. Has a 60 kilowatt hour battery and a 10 kilowatt charger. If we had that, that would result in 300 gigawatt hour additional storage capacity. And just to give you a frame of reference, today, approximately 4.2 gigawatt hour energy storage is procured in California. And we are estimating 11 gigawatt hour are needed by 2030, according to SAESA. It would result in 50 gigawatt potential extra peak power. And just again, to put it in perspective, California average peak power in summer is around 38 gigawatts. And 125 billion would have been invested by the EV owners at no extra cost to California, to the grid owners or to the ratepayers. And up to 23 million tons of CO2 could be saved yearly. So we can really move the needle if we really have a lot of these vehicle-to-grid cars on the road. It's a well-proven technology. And for example, we have logged more than 300,000 V2G fleet hours. My previous company, Nuve, down in San Diego, we started a deployment in September 6, 2016, and it's been running until now. It's a small utility company in Copenhagen, and we have aggregated 10 Nissan ENV 200, which is a van version of the Nissan Leaf, 24 kilowatt hour, and 10 Magnum Cab 10 kilowatt hour bidirectional chargers. We're providing frequency regulation to the TSO Energinet, and providing 180 hours of V2G operations per week, every day, and all 24 hours, Saturday and Sunday, generating approximately $1,800 of revenue per EV per year. And as I mentioned, have logged 300,000 fleet hours of V2G operations with very little vehicle-to-grid battery degradation. Now, the supply chain for bidirectional EVs is also increasing dramatically. Before this year, we only basically had two car companies, Nissan Leafs and Mitsubishi Motors, the Outlander. Right now, that's almost exploding. We have so many car companies that are now introducing, or have introduced V2G in their cars or in the trucks. And announcement for some of the big Volkswagen, Renault, and last week, Toyota. So there's an enormous momentum and a large increase in the supply chain of V2G capable vehicles, not only passenger vehicles, but also medium to heavy duty vehicles. And the same can be said for the EVSE supply chain. really gaining momentum and very important, coming down substantially in price. Before, we only had very few on the market and they were very expensive. And now, as you can see here, there's a plethora of new EVSE on the market for the infrastructure at substantially lower cost. Most of these are today DC, which are still a little bit expensive, but there's also AC on the road now. And AC presents a much lower price point. So let's just take two use cases. V2G really can make a difference. Here is a California projection for 2030. We can see here that we're expecting a lot of solar. Just for your information, every new house in California as of this year has to have solar installed on the roof. And we have the famous duck curve starting in 2013. It's not really a duck. In 2019, we can see that it started resembling a duck. And this is in 2030. It is really a big, big duck. We can see the neck up here. And what happens is here that we have a surplus of solar energy and we have to curtail it unless we can find uses for it. What if we could find uses for it? For example, if we had 5 million V2G cars, we could soak up inexpensive solar energy. And it's very inexpensive also. There's almost no CO2. So if we did 13 gigawatts over 3 hours, 13 gigawatt per hour, I would say that would be approximately 10 kilowatt hour per car soaking up energy here. That would lead to 2.7 million tons of CO2 would be emitted. But if we could discharge it for 3 hours up here to flatten the neck here and not only flatten the belly, we would by CO2 content about 310 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, we could save 16 million tons of CO2. So summa summarum, that could be a CO2 saving per day of 13.3 million tons if such a scenario came to fruition. Another bullet case, silver bullet case, would be the energy resilient vehicles that we have introduced in California. It's basically vehicles to the home. And California has PSPS event. It's like you're rolling blackout. It's called public safety, public power shut off. And in case we have one of these events, which can last up to 5 days, and can cover millions of customers, cars or trucks or school buses could provide emergency energy. And the same could be the case to load shed mitigations in South Africa. Now, the good news is that we have already started in South Africa. ULO had the first V2G installation in 2017, and that's where I met Eaton for the first time. And also the second V2G installation in Africa started in 2019 at the United Nations Development Program, here shown in the figure in Namibia, in the capital. And it consisted of 2 Nissan Leaf and 2 Magnum Cab charging stations, an aggregator from Nuve. And I'll just show you a short video towards the end of my presentation. So this was the end of my presentation, and I would be very interested in entertaining questions after the next presentation. Thank you very much, Eaton. Back to you.
Great, Bjorn. Thank you very much for the key insights you've shared and really taking us from a real practical experience on what is being done. I think, you know, usually on the case, we always hear about these sort of presentations and just information, but I think your presentation has really covered, you know, key aspects on what is being achieved, and we really appreciate that. I think we'll take questions after the next session as well. But with that, we'll move on to our next presenter that's joining us, Sergio Kane, who is the Managing Director for Africa for Eaton Electrical. It's great to have you join us today, Sergio, and thank you for availing the time. So over to you for your presentation for the session. Thanks, Sergio.
Thanks, Eaton. Please do confirm if you can see my screen. I'll just swipe it around.
That's all good. Thanks, Sergio.
Okay, perfect. Hey, thanks for the opportunity. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. And just building on Bjorn's presentation, I think it's a very clear assertion to say that there's no better time than now to be an intelligent power management company. So what I'm going to share with you is just, you know, a few insights around, you know, how Eaton as a power management organization is approaching this V2G space and the fast changing environment in the power sector and particularly, you know, in the EV space. For us at Eaton, you know, it is an exciting time because we're at the junction of some of the key secular trends. You know, the transition from fossil fuels to renewable, driving the energy transition, which in turn, you know, with the necessity to reduce the carbon footprint is increasing significantly the use of electricity, so a massive increase in electrification. And with that electrification, you know, everything is underpinned by also a significant ascent of digitalization, right? So this is you know, those three elements that we're using basically to support our customers, you know, the different stakeholders that we engage with, but also we as Eaton are taking some commitments. So we are committed by 2030 to basically reduce our emissions by 50% across our, you know, plant network, but also to reach carbon neutrality. So who's Eaton? Eaton is a power management company, global power management company, as I did mention earlier. Two main space or sector of activity: an electrical sector, which represent the bulk of our organization, and an industrial sector where we have an aerospace and vehicle organization, about, you know, $18 billion, and really position across the globe and taking on the challenges that we're seeing when it comes to electrification. Now, the electrification of our economies is a fact, right? So in average, we're looking at 65% increase in power demand globally. But you know, when you look at Africa specifically, with the significant increase in population that, you know, Bjorn alluded to earlier, we're seeing this increase in demand to more than triple, you know, by 2050. And obviously, you know, with that increase, you know, you need to have in infrastructure, you need to manage, the risks that will come, in terms of grid congestion, and to that effect, we're focusing mainly, in three main areas, right? Transport, the transport infrastructure, buildings, and also industrial footprint or network to support, those economies. When we think about those changes happening in terms of the electrification of our economies, there is an evident element in terms of the different nature of what the electrical reticulation is going to be tomorrow. The increase of renewable in the system will provoke a rethinking of the energy system, and to also support and unlock a low carbon energy future for the different economies, and particularly as well in Africa. I think South Africa being considered the 12th biggest polluter, in the world, and the COP26 happening today is a stark reminder around what we need to do around those elements. And very clearly, we at Eaton believe that the future of the grid reticulation is going to be more distributed energy. It's going to be focusing on bidirectional flows of energies, but also the requirement for intelligent power management systems to be embedded, right, to increase the efficiency of the efficiency, but also optimizing, the energy that we're using. And that's how we came with this concept of everything as a grid. Everything as a grid is basically thinking about, EV as a backup when you have a power outage. I mean, as it is the case right now in Johannesburg, where I sit as we speak right now. It's using data center infrastructure, for instance, as a potential solution for frequency regulation for municipalities or the grid. It's also integrating industries to improve their bottom line by selling back electricity to the operator. So everything as a grid is really interlinking and bringing all the different pieces into an ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, we have a particular focus on building and buildings as a grid, and looking at buildings, homes or commercial building as energy hubs that we will focus and use in order to connect our EV infrastructure, but also leverage renewable energy storage in order to basically build a future-proof electrical infrastructure. And this topic of infrastructure for Africa is absolutely key. Right now, when we think about it, their infrastructure on the continent is 50, 60, 70 years old, right? It will be also an opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint, which is a clear focus from a sustainability perspective. Again, improve resiliency. And I think resiliency is maybe even the very first ask when you deal with grid infrastructures in Africa. So there was a study done very recently out of 48 countries in Africa that were subject to this study. 30 of those face very regular blackouts. Right, so resiliency for homes, for businesses is absolutely critical. And the last point, which is also very critical, is the safety of the infrastructure, but also adaptation to the different regulation and standard that are key here. And when I talk about safety, there's also another topic around security and cyber security. All the infrastructure is now cloud and grid related. So those are concerns that we really need to take to heart in order to manage the building as a grid. Now, this slide here, pinpoints why EVCI, so electric vehicle charging infrastructure, is a central component to our our approach to energy transition, and particularly within the building. We split it in kind of 3 blocks, 3 main blocks. On the left-hand side, we have the EV charging system, whereby we need smart charging infrastructure, that is supported. So basically, on the top, you have what I would call the components really, and what we bring in as hardware, if I can put it that way. And on the bottom, you have all the digital infrastructure that is actually the brain of the system in order to help manage and balance the power requirement and infrastructure. So on the left hand side, the EV charging system, we recently acquired a company in Switzerland called Green Motion that does only that, manufacturing EV charging systems. And with that, we have as well the CPO, the charging point operator, which is the software that will help load balancing, that will help identifying when the vehicle is on the grid and when it can charge. It will help as well the metering and the bill management in the context of specifically charging, and also eventually demand response that is required from an EV perspective. Then in the center you have the site, the building, if I can put it, or the integration into the building. Obviously, demand response load, UPS storage that Eaton spoke about earlier as well. But the equipment that we have now as well has to evolve. The power distribution, the type of switchgear that we will use, and most importantly, the management system, the electrical management system, in order to balance the resources and the loads, the generation and the load forecasting that is required in there, the power bill management, but also the integration with the grid signals. And on the last block, basically we're moving, beyond the meter, right? So how does these buildings, this network of building will integrate into the grid in order to, support potentially frequency regulation, demand response, but also tariffs. So this is the continuum in which we see the vehicle and particularly the charging infrastructure as a key portion in terms of managing the whole ecosystem to support the grid. This is just a kind of an emphasis, an additional emphasis on the building energy management software. Really, I mean, on the ability to intelligently monitor, optimize, all the entrants, and also support, with the firmware update the alert, provide a good backbone, for cybersecurity. Those are some of the elements that we're bringing to the floor with a very simple, ability for any consumer or rather prosumer to manage and make their own choices. Right. So those are some of the few elements that we are working on as Eaton in order to enable, the African customer and globally, obviously, but this is a particular focus on Africa in order to manage their loads in the very near future. Now, what are those benefits? So the benefits are maximize earnings. So, it's absolutely a no-brainer in Africa that, PV is the cheapest source that we can identify. Avoid, peak charges, reduce the use of fossil fuels, continuity of supply. I think this resiliency is absolutely critical on the grid, particularly, on the continent. The sustainability aspect is fundamental. I think, it's a global concern that we need as well to tap on. But also the last one is the customer service and the customer centricity, enable the prosumer to make their choices, to understand what they're doing, and to be able to make their choices whenever they want, right? Obviously, the benefit as well is an impact on the clear UN compact, and by doing so, we support some of the 6 critical development goals that are on the left, and I'm not gonna insist or spend a lot of time on those, but very clearly there's an element of partnerships that is key. And as Eaton, we have, for instance, a partnership that we started with Nissan for almost 10 years now, whereby we are already reusing second life batteries. So basically batteries that were used on the Leaf vehicle that we're reusing for static storage application in Africa. In the site that I am right now, we have backup power that is powered by some of those Leaf batteries, second life Leaf batteries. I'd like to end by just sharing a few thoughts. In the African context, I think technology is not necessarily the problem. I think we will bring the technology in, and I have faith that we will be able once more in Africa to leapfrog the same way it happened. That it's maybe topical, but the same way it happened for mobile phone and cellular phone, there is an opportunity to do the same when it comes to the electrical infrastructure. However, there are some challenges, right? So the cost of electric vehicle and reaching this critical mass is also going to be important in order to significantly impact, the issues that are faced on the continent. Legislation, regulation, common standards, but also it is important to understand that, in a country like Kenya, for instance, close to 90% of the cars are second-hand cars from the West that are being brought into Africa. So meaning that the legislator, the governments will have to take a very clear line to enable this transition to happen. Urban planning is another one. I think Africa will be host to a lot of the mega cities. The number of cities of more than 5 million will explode on the continent in the next few years. So urban planning currently is completely decoupled with the energy planning, right? So there is a lot of work that will have to happen in there in order to really coordinate and enable, this transition again to happen. And the last point is really end of life. So fast forward, there is a lot of EVs. We are benefiting of the flexibility that EV is bringing to the grid. What will happen at end of life and disposal of those batteries? So those are just few thoughts that I wanted to put in there, and very much looking to engage with everybody else. I'll stop here. Thank you. Eaton, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Sergio, for those insights that you shared, and really topical points that you addressed, from the technology perspective, and what typical solutions are available. Perhaps just picking up on that, you spoke as a power management company, and I think that's what's really critical is managing the power. How do you see the role of energy storage playing into that? And I think what is key within that is, when we speak about energy storage, let's not forget about EVs, because the key thing to note with EVs, they are mobile batteries in that sense. So I think when we, everything that we address in there, we can then speak about EVs also benefiting from that perspective. So I'd like to know your view on that, and just see how you see the role of energy storage playing out from that perspective, specifically for the energy sector.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Eaton. I think that there's a very clear realization now that storage is going to be part of the solution, right? So as we talk about energy transition, we'll bring more renewable on board, and one of the limitations of renewable energy is very clearly the intermittency. So it is a no-brainer that if we want a stable, predictable grid, you will need to have more storage on board, and ESCOM is finally moving ahead, from what I'm seeing, with bringing in close to $1 billion worth of storage, on the reticulation in order to basically better integrate that. So So from my perspective, I think that storage will play a great role. The technology is proven. I think Bjorn alluded to that. There's no doubt about it. The cost is going down, and particularly with the increase, the significant increase in electric vehicle, that will be the case. I just hope that the situation and the glut that we're seeing right now, in terms of the rush to get material, is not going to change that curve. Because I get back to my first point, there is a cost, there is a financial issue in Africa, and then some will say, what do you put first? It's a chicken and an egg situation, whereby I'm not going to buy an EV until I have enough power and certainty around that. But then, some will say then, I won't put the infrastructure until I'm sure that there'll be enough user to use that infrastructure. So I think we're in a situation right now where, we'll need a push in order to go beyond that. But storage is here to stay, and it is going to be a significant part of the solution.
Great. Thanks very much, Sergio, for that. Bjorn, over to you. I think one of the major questions around this trending topic of vehicle to grid is how does this impact the battery? And I think you provided in your introductory slides that it's exploding. From the manufacturer side, I think they're acknowledging what is coming out on that, and you're looking at the business models of the OEMs. The vehicle manufacturers starting to change. They're moving into the energy business. So just from your expertise, can you shed some light on how, does V2G really degrade the battery?
Well, I've been, as I mentioned, in this field for about 11 years, and that is the most posed question: what happens to my battery? And so there's a lot of perceptions out there. There are studies that are saying it degrades the battery substantially, depending on the conditions. Condition mean what is the state of charge of the battery, what is the temperature of the batteries and things like that, and what is the charging power, all the way up to, well, V2G enhances the life of the battery because it's basically outsourcing the charging of the car. So if you have V2G every time it's plugged in, V2G makes sure, if it's a good V2G system, that you always operate in a safe SOC range of the battery, in a safe temperature range, and not with too much power. We have to remember the battery is by nature, the car electrical vehicle is by nature bidirectional. It's born, every car is born bidirectional. Why? Because when you press the accelerator, you actually take energy from the battery to the motor. But if you brake, regenerative energy goes back into the battery. So you have an inverter already in the car, which is part of the car. Now, those forces on the battery and the motor are substantial. I mean, you're talking about up to 100 kilowatt or something like that, whereas most of the V2G applications are, let's say, 7 kilowatts, maybe 10 kilowatts. In some cases, with larger battery, it can go up to high power. The reason I'm saying all that is just to put in perspective. So I've seen tons of papers, I've seen tons of presentations and so forth, but the best guide that I have is the deployment that we have done in Denmark. We have now logged 300,000 hours on Nissan ENV 200 under very grueling circumstances, frequency regulation. Frequency regulation in the Nordic region, which is a Nordic synchronous region, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark. It's a small grid, it's about 30 million subscribers, and the frequency is very, let's say, varying because of all the renewable energy that we have in there. So it puts a lot of stress on anybody that wants to provide frequency regulation. So back to what we have done in Denmark, we have all these 5 years of experience. What we did, we teamed up with Danish Technical University to have an independent source, and they measured those 10 cars every year. They've been measured for battery state of health. And they have found, which is released in a paper, they have found that the most of the degradation comes from aging, by far the biggest. Then you have to drive the car. So there's wear from normally driving the car. And again, these forces are much more than V2G. And then there's fast charging. So over this the summary is over those 5 years that we have been running the trial in Denmark, we have noticed a 6 to 10% degradation resulting from aging, from driving, and from fast charging, whereas only a 1 to 2% battery degradation from V2G. Now, this is done on a 24 kilowatt hour battery in a relatively cold climate in the winter, and with no battery thermal management. So we feel very comfortable, and that's just we have other examples, but these are real life examples. These are not theoreticals. These are not papers. These are not projections. This is real cars under real conditions. So we feel very comfortable that battery wear is not going to be an issue. The best testament to that is that Nissan offers battery warranty if you agree with Nissan how to use the battery before you start using it.
Great, Bjorn. Those are excellent insights, and also debunking the myths behind that. And I think you really brought some great points there. Let's pick up a question that's coming on the chat from the attendees. So Sergio, maybe you can take this. Africa is not fully gridded with the current infrastructure. So how do we see the role of technologies and EVs adapting in Africa in that perspective? And from the technology side, you can address that. And then secondly, what is the role for government from that perspective? So great if you can just tackle that, Sergio.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why there's always an irony when some people start talking about EV. They say that think first about the 600 million people in the continent right now that do not have access to modern energy. I think we need to think of it differently. I think I dare to say that maybe the power that will be required for the EV owner will not or may not come from the grid, right? So think we might have think about opportunities whereby DC charging comes in as the critical base load, I would say, for EV to start with, but invariably the grid will have to adapt gradually to support it. For me, when I think about the problem that way, I get back again to the topic of mobile phone. I think the grid today in Africa largely is in 95% is public, is government owned, yeah, sad to say, but most of African governments are broke. So it's only when those specific OEMs, see a market in Africa come in and private money gets into the system that we'll start thinking about the business model differently. I think the expectation is not going to be just to wait for government to put the infrastructure and thereafter you get the cars and so on. We need to think of it completely differently. The same way today, Google is able to fund, for people to have their smartphone as far as they just go and open the app. We might very clearly, easily imagine OEMs enabling, people to have, their electricity reticulation or helping enabling that so that they can use their vehicle. Right, and on top of it, it's a virtuous circle for all the country and the continent. In terms of regulation, maybe just a word on that. I think the government will need to step in, with most of the countries where we see this development, there's been tax incentives. Today, I think Eaton, you mentioned it in one of your articles. An electric vehicle in South Africa imported bears more tax than an internal combustion one. So tax incentive are one. I think restriction to import of second-hand cars are also other things that governments can quickly put in order to push or accelerate that transition.
Great, thank you, Sergio. Bjorn, as Sergio also mentioned, right now in South Africa, we're having rolling blackouts, and what was stage 2 earlier, we went into stage 4 at short notice. And I think sometimes we think this is an African problem. And I think you joining us from California, California had rolling blackouts. So, this is a perfect example how developed countries also experiencing these challenges. How do you see, from a real world experience in California, how do you see the role of batteries and obviously, again, EVs and the technology of vehicle to grid supporting that? And I think one of the nice reference examples is also on the school buses. So, looking at that and what that presents. So, if you can just shed some light on an example like California in what you are experiencing as an energy crisis, and what is the opportunity for EVs and vehicle to grid?
Yes, here in California, and California, of course, is a relatively large state, and we consider ourselves as the canary in the coal mine. We have recurring wildfires, and it has been with us for thousands of years. It's a national phenomenon. But what has happened lately is that we have become drier, and we have had longer period of a very dry summer. Also what has happened is that we have not had forest management as one should have. So there's a number of reasons, but the sum of it all is that we're having these wildfires that, coupled with very strong wind, almost sometimes hurricane wind, makes these fires very, very deadly. In the past, a long time ago, 10 years ago, those fires just burned out. They were out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, no people living there, or very few people living there. And it wasn't really a big thing. We tried to contain them as much as we could and just let them burn out, and eventually some rain came. Now, that's not the case anymore. In 2018, we had a very catastrophic year. We had the Paradise Fire, which is about 100 miles from where I live, where a city of about 20,000 people burned down in about 4 hours. Now, there was a loss of life. About 200 people lost their life, and about $20 billion, at least, in property damage. So it really, made the regulators and the politicians start thinking, what can we do? So one of the things that we found out by investigating these fires was that the California the PG&E, which is the utility here in the area of San Francisco, Northern California, due to all their exposed wires, unless they don't really maintain their wires very well. It's a privately owned public utility. That means they have shareholders, and they skipped on the maintenance. And what happened was many of those fires were actually ignited by the electric grid. So that led to a very draconian solution, saying we will then do something called PSPS event. PSPS event is public safety power shut off. And they will do proactively when the forecast is that we're going to have high wind, there are very high fire dangers in zone red. Then they will shut proactively the power off. You will get a warning, so you have 1 or 2 days before that happens, so you can plan. But when they do that, it can last up to 5 days. And this is very, very hard, especially for disadvantaged people. That means you have to throw everything away in your fridge, everything in your freezer, which is typically $500 or something like that, at least every time it went. If you have medical conditions, medical equipment at home, you have to go to the hospital at $1,300 per night. Well, this is America, So this is a huge disturbance of people. And what has happened now is there's been a renewed interest in batteries, and also in mobile batteries, and school buses as now a focus. So school buses is a very beautiful application for vehicle to grid. They're not driving very much in the morning, in the afternoon to pick up children, not in the weekend. They have huge vacations, 6 weeks vacation, and they don't drive in holidays. They have very predictable routes, and they have very large batteries. So we're looking at it to mitigate those. It is load shedding or basically brownouts, or is how can we use those buses for community power? So we have centers where we have community power. So these centers are springing up now in California, also with stationary batteries. Well, they're not stationary, they're on trucks. So battery technology will play a big role in mitigating these PSPS events, which we think will be even more frequently. And I haven't even mentioned the earthquakes, of course. We are just we're 2 centimeters away from the next big earthquake. So I think battery technology, certainly mobile battery technology in buses, in large trucks, and in passenger cars, I think is going to play a big role. And that's why I introduced to the California Energy Commission 3 years ago, I introduced the concept energy resilient vehicles, which is basically vehicle to home.
Great. Thanks, Bjorn, for that. So if we just continue the conversation, I think one of the attendees also asked a question. I think, Bjorn, if you can shed some light on this, is what is the regulation around vehicle to grid? I think this is the interesting aspect, because in many cases, we see technology maturing and really evolving and exploding. But what is the regulation side? Perhaps if you can just briefly touch on that, and possibly in that answer, just address the barriers that you see from a regulatory perspective.
Well, everything is almost in place. All the ducks are almost in road. The technology works and improving. Prices are coming down. The supply chain is increasing. Standards are on the cusp of being there. All of the pre-versions are there. Everything is coming in there. But for regulations. Now, regulation is a big issue. In California, of course, we have a lot of sunshine and we have a lot of rooftop solar. And it's really exploding. As I mentioned, mandatory as of this year, all new houses has to have PV solar on the roof. So it's exploding. And, we had a lot of experience in the beginning, which were not good. And then we looked at Germany, and Germany, of course, was one of the first countries really to penetrate the solar. And they had issues with voltage management. Suddenly, all these, because of a cloud, or whatever happens, all the solars went out, or all the solar came up again, or there was too much solar power, the voltage went up, or too little, it went down, and things like that. So we learned in California from that experience, and we introduced something in California Energy Commission, introduced something called Rule 21. And Rule 21 in an interconnection rule. So that's for mostly for the solar industry. But then we came from the V2G industry and say, hey, don't forget us. And they were very reluctant to consider electrical vehicles as a special, let's say, technology class. They said this should be technology neutral, which has some other issues that I don't want to go into. So Rule 21, we have been working very hard on that, also with my previous company, through a big project we got with California Energy Commission called Invent, to pave the way regulatory for large-scale deployment of V2G fleets in California. And that has led to, in September last year, California Public Utility Commissions actually approved interconnection rules for V2G cars if the inverter is in the charging station. That means for DC. That means you can support all the normal inverter functions like reactive power, 4-quadrant reactive power, and things like that. Now, the AC side is still being worked on. So if the inverter is in the car, there's a study group that's been working now for 4 years, and working group 3, and that's trying to harmonize the standards between SAE, which is the automobile work, and the grid, which is represented by EPRI here. So the grid operators and the industry has to come up with common standard. Most of them will be based anyway on IEEE standard. So this is happening now because the inverter is becoming mobile. And that has some issues. The car manufacturers, they want to do global standards. They don't want to go from grid code to grid code. That's not feasible. They're not going to do that. So there's something that needs to be sorted out. I expect that will take maybe a year, but then I think California would be in very good position for interconnection rules. Now, what still needs to be done are the tariffs. And the tariffs are not very favorable. If they want to take use of V2G batteries, then they have to come up with some tariffs that makes business model possible. Otherwise, all the V2G is going to be behind the meter.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Bjorn. So I think also from part of the work that we've been doing in looking at the landscape and in Europe perspective, VDE 2.0 is the main reference point that allows bidirectional activity on that. And I think most inverters are already, so you're talking about your renewable energy and hybrid inverters are already certified to that. And I think that's a similar certification to what V2G hardware will also be coming into that. So thanks, Bjorn, for sharing those insights from that perspective. We on the hour now and just over, which has been a really great session and really great insights. I think with all of us, we can certainly continue the conversation, but I really appreciate everybody's comments here. Sedu, possibly in just under a minute in wrapping up, how do you see the outlook for the technologies discussed today for Africa?
Very positive. Very positive. I'm optimistic that this leapfrogging will happen. I saw one of the comments earlier whereby Africa has this capacity to adapt very quickly to innovation, and I think it's a must. Actually, we don't have much of a choice, in order to really very quickly turn it around and adapt to energy transition and to the new technologies, and particularly EVs.
Great, thanks so much. Bjorn, from your side, closing comments. I think you've been doing some work in Africa as well. You mentioned the showcase in Namibia. From your side, the experiences, how do you see, just in closing, the outlook from your experience from the international lens?
Well, for full disclosure, I'm working with United Nations Development Program, and this was, the reason why I talked to you guys about the Namibia Showcase program. Now, I'll share with you, UNDP has something called the Moonshot program. They have 170 offices around the world, and many of them in Africa. And they have now set very strict targets in 2025 and 2030 as to how to reduce CO2. They have a fleet about 2,100 ICE cars, and they want to convert them, not at the same time, of course. And they want to have showcase projects. Many of them will be in Africa. So I see that as a catalyst. Now, of course, there's an issue that was mentioned before, what about the charging infrastructure? But since 90% or maybe even more of charging takes place at the home base, and if you have a predictable travel pattern, then you can look at business cases, certainly in United Nations, that will enable almost to serve as an island, but serve as let's say, a North Star for the local community, for VIPs, for the government, but also very much for industry, private industry. So I see it very, very positively, and this is something that I will be engaged in very much over the years. So I see it very positive, and again, we don't have a choice.
Great, thank you, Bjorn. I think you really touched on great insights there, and really appreciate your expertise and sharing insights with us today, bright and early in California. And thank you once again, Bjorn, for taking the time today. Thank you, Sedu, for sharing your insights as well. And thank you for all the attendees that have joined in today. We certainly hope that you've enjoyed the brief insights shared today. Solar Power Africa takes place next year, February. It's going to be a live event, and we'll monitor activities on them. But look forward to that. There'll be more insights being shared at the event. SAESA, the South African Energy Storage Association, will be having a full day event on energy storage. So there's a full program lined up for that. Please do look out for that event, and also feel free to join SAESA. It's very active, very proactive, sharing insights, knowledge sharing, and growing the community and the role for energy storage in South Africa and Africa as well. So without further ado, thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights and taking the time today. Thank you for the attendees joining today. And let's continue the conversation and really increase the uptake of energy storage, and not forgetting the opportunities for electric vehicles. I think what's key and what's being highlighted is the role to work collectively with international communities, with the technology providers and government. I think that's a key role to play. And from our side, from UILO, we look forward to working with everybody, with you, and all other role players. Thank you, keep safe, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.